Kathy Krajco was of the first survivors who talked about narcissistic abuse under her real name. She died unexpectedly in her home in 2008. She was 56 years old. I suspect the narc hive mind was behind her death. In her book, What Makes the Narcissists Tick, Kathy says, the way society tolerates it, you'd think mental cruelty was no big deal. It's even appearing in the media, especially in Europe, where it seems to be regarded as funny. But making light of something doesn't make it funny. It does, however, destroy your sense of humor. People blow off bullying in schools with the line that the victim is vulnerable between commas, equals to blame between parentheses, and that between commas everything gets picked on. Making light of such weighty matters is what the parents of bullies do. Mental cruelty, no big deal? Purely psychological abuse like this is usually worse than violent physical abuse. In fact, people feel less degraded by physical abuse, except insofar as there's some psychologically abusive element in it. For example, women feel much less abused by being beaten than being raped. You can make sweeping statements about this because there often is a cruel psychological element in physical abuse. This is generally true of torture, and it was true of the Holocaust. The atrocious death sentences by slow torture imposed by both church and state in the past are consummate examples of physical abuse designed as vicious assaults on a person's human dignity. The victims of the church especially were often dressed and or stripped naked, between parentheses, exhibited for public ridicule and contempt for hours, and then executed in ways cunningly designed to make the crowd laugh at the victim's struggles and agony. What could be more psychologically sadistic? So, when sick minds get into the act, it's hard to tell where the physical trauma ends and the psychological trauma begins. But victims invariably say the psychological trauma, often in little things, is the worst. They are the things that crush a person's spirit, making him or her feel like dirt and long to just die. Treating others subhumanly like this would make you or I shame ourselves because we would rightly see it as debasing ourselves. But these imbeciles think they are... Okay, let's start the phrase over. But these imbeciles think they're elevating themselves by behaving subhumanly, and they are extremely proud of themselves for it. So apparently they can't get anything straight. They obviously can't tell their head from their ass because they can't tell things head from its tail. They get the subject and object of the deed reversed to think that the subhuman one is the one who is receiving and of a subhuman deed. And yet they all think they're so intelligent. My own observations make me think that narcissists are ever on the lookout for an opportunity to abuse someone and get away with it. I think they instantly notice whenever the coast is clear and zap, do it almost reflexively like machines. But let a potential witness appear, zap, they are a sweet person who would not hurt a fly. I think you probably have to have seen this transfiguration to believe it. but I tell you that they can switch from Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde and back again in a split second. It's downright spooky. And that makes sense, considering why narcissists abuse. They do it because it makes them feel good. They are like an alcoholic at work who notices the moment he is alone and goes for the bottle. He always wants it, but he can't have it. When he would get it, he would get in trouble for it. So I think attack abuse mode is a narcissist's normal state, and all it takes is a vulnerable target of opportunity, a chance to get away with it, between parentheses to trigger action. This is true of any predator, really. When they are hungry, the very sight of a vulnerable target of opportunity triggers an attack. Unfortunately, many people assume that, like a normal people, narcissists need some reason for hostility toward the person the target would abuse. Normal people attack for natural motives of retaliatory defense or revenge. But narcissists have no reason, and their motive is unnatural. They just pick easy prey and attack whenever they see a chance to get away with it. Hence, they most often abuse their own children, brothers and sisters, lovers, best friends, and benefactors. In other settings, they attack the meek and gentle, and those whose virtue puts them to shame. Just because that other person has a little of what the narcissist views as all belongs to him, worth, dignity, and self-respect, he must have it all, and anyone else who gets any is depriving him of it. Narcissists are so hooked on their drugs, so in need of getting it all, that they fight off temptations to show any regard for anybody else. This explains their most perplexing behavior. The stronger the temptation to give a little of themselves, the harder they must fight to fight it off. I am as sure as I can be that this is why they react violently to moments that strongly call for attention / regard / humanity to others. The strongest calls that those heart-rending ones for love, those that compel sorrow, compassion, affection, sympathy, and what the Italians call pietà. Just try to beg a narcissist to even just sit down and be someone for you to talk to at a moment like that. They react to such pleas like someone being burned at the stake reacts to a flame. They fight it off as though it were an attack on them, as though it were a vampire's attempt to suck their lifeblood. When you see a narcissist do this, you can't believe your eyes, yet calls for his affection and compassion, or, in a way, an attack on him. He identifies with his image, which is supposed to be so godlike that you are an insignificant bug compared to him. Bugs don't even get noticed by a god, let alone loved and comforted by one. You're supposed to play the part. When you don't, when a mere bug like you expects to matter to God Almighty, you are challenging his delusion. You're relating to him as an equal and not cooperating in his game of pretend between commas that he is God Almighty compared to you. Like a 3-year-old, he gets mad at anyone who doesn't play along with his game of between commas, let's pretend. That challenge attacks his phony image. Since he thinks it's him, he views that as an attack on him. That's why any form of strong pull at his heartstrings triggers the narcissistic rage. This is when narcissistic abuse goes ballistic, leaving the victim unable to report it because nobody on this planet will believe that anyone would do such a thing as he has done. It becomes the perfect crime, the one so outrageous nobody believes it. The victim herself can hardly believe it. This is why he makes the big mistake. Oh, sorry. This is why she makes the big mistake. She thinks that callousness is some kind of moral callous, that it can be penetrated, that if she pleads for his compassion, she can get through it. She can get through it to his heart. His reaction to that, wham! He is likely to take a psychotic break. Since this is the extreme opposite of what was called for, it has the same effect on the victim as shock treatment. It disarms her and puts her in a state one is in during a horrible nightmare. This is the cycle of narcissistic abuse that leaves the savage victim a crumpled heap on her knees at his feet in tears and begging him to at least tell her he doesn't wish she were dead. He doesn't wish she were dead, but it would kill him to say so. So his reply is to spit on her and kick her away in utter contempt. By trying to penetrate his callousness, the victim has unwittingly been risking her very life. He acts as though this was an attack on him because it was being put in italics. The victims of narcissists must understand this. This narcissist could just as well be a woman. In fact, one of the two most physically violent narcissists I personally know is a woman, whereas male narcissists must be more careful. Being a woman, she is probably so uninhibited because she feels that nobody would believe her victim's complaints that a woman could be so physically violent. In any case, since about the age of 9, she has flown at the victim with her fists, milling at the face. She kneels on the victim, digging her nails into the wrist and saying, "I'm stronger than you," between commas. She has beaten one of her victims for 20 minutes straight, literally punching herself out. We can relate to this mentality. We can imagine being that way, but if you apply pure logic to the equation, you can see what's going on. He feels that this pottery bug is hurting him, degrading his lofty image between parentheses by acting as though it has the right to expect something besides supercilious disdain from God Almighty. His mirror is not shining attention on him like it should. It has been replaced with her face wanting him to shine attention on her. In fact, one narcissist I know of looked away from his pleading victim's tearful face as if in horror. When asked why, he pointed and bellowed, "Why should I have to look at that?" between commas. That meaning her face. So this terrible narcissistic child throws a temper tantrum to break his gnarly mirror. In wanting blood from a turnip, the victim might as well have tried to steal heroin from an addict in withdrawal. Nobody in their right mind would try to steal heroin from an addict in withdrawal because we instinctively know it would be grabbing a tiger by tail. It's the same with narcissists. Don't try to pry for them that they would rather die than give. Besides, they haven't got any. And so, what happens What appeases normal people and rage narcissists. What evokes empathy from normal people evokes brutality from narcissists. It's as though their brains are crammed in their skulls, upside down and backwards. If there is one thing I wish everybody in the world knew, it would be this. When someone's reaction to a thing is the opposite of what was called for, notice that red flag the first time it shows and stay away. For more information, visit Bully online, Bullying in the Family. This is on page 234. It seems that you should regard a raging narcissist as you would a threatening dog. Don't try to reason with it. Don't look it in the eyes. And don't take one step backward, or it will run you over. Hopefully, after it had barked its head off enough to think it won, it would just go away without physically attacking you. For the only thing that seems to quell a narcissistic rage is A. Others suddenly appearing on the scene to see what's going on, or B. Self-defense as forceful as the attack. That means raging right back in the narcissist's face and throwing punches if he or she has. Either produces an instantaneous transfiguration into the picture of poor little me wouldn't hurt a fly, between commas, meekness. Seeing him switch personas in the blink of an eye like that would give you the creeps. But no child can defend himself from an adult this way, and no woman can defend herself from a man this way. Even if the victim is physically capable of defending himself, the situation is explosive and dangerous. Also, if you are so threatened and or outraged that you really are raging, between parentheses, instead of just acting as though you're raging, then both parties to the conflict are not in control of themselves. Extremely dangerous for both of you. So, it is far better to just get away from a malignant narcissist before the violence of his abuse escalates to the point that you are in physical danger. You can't help him. Trained psychiatrists can hardly help him. And I won't add anything because this is her book. Okay, let's continue. Children have fewer options, but they should know that public school teachers, counselors, and administrators are legally obligated to report any child's complaint or any mere suspicion between parentheses of abuse. Note, I said public because there is apparently some special dispensation for private school personnel in the United States. The employers of Catholic school personnel, the bishops, have not been required to report it and do not promise to report it. 6.4 The Slanderer. Character assassination is another aspect of malignant narcissism. In fact, every malignant narcissist is an inveterate slanderer, a good name slayer. For the narcissist has the mentality of rapist. He or she must tear people down off that pedestal, between commas. The rapist is filthy, you see. So he must pretend he's dirtying others so he can pretend they're dirtier than him. That's how he makes himself feel clean. Because his brain is crammed into his skull upside down and backwards. The narcissist does the same thing. He just has a little different style. Whoops, I think I jumped something. No. The narcissist does the same thing. It just has a different style. Both the rapist and the narcissist are just playing the teeter-tooter game, pretending to aggrandize themselves by diminishing someone else. So, Show me a malignant narcissist and I will show you someone who almost never says anything about anyone that you would like to hear said about you. This aspect of malignant narcissism is one of the most evident. In other words, it should be one of the first warning signs you get. That's why I mention it as a red flag. A narcissist will give evidence against himself almost every time he opens his mouth with someone else's name on his tongue. So it's a good idea to pay attention to the way people talk about others. It reminds me of a hilarious line in the book of Ecclesiastes. You should keep your distance from people who don't speak well of others, because they need to shake themselves off every so often. And if you're too close to them at the moment, you're going to get mud on you. Implicit in that advice is the warning that slander is projection, which it usually is. This is another thing that people who know a narcissist should be able to spot him or her. If someone tells you something bad about a stranger, you don't know what to think. But if someone tells you something bad about someone you know, just vet that information by comparing it with what you know firsthand about that person. If people did this, slander would be much harder to get away with, and narcissists would be out of business. That's because their accusations are almost always preposterous. For instance, they will accuse the most manifestly honest person in the joint of being a liar. That's because they aren't just shaking themselves off, they are out to smear virtue in someone with that mud. But they have other motives too. The narcissist is the slanderer partly also to get attention. Notice that the finger pointer in the picture above has his other hand raised to get attention between parentheses. They come up with some pretty strange tales about people. They are like the press in knowing what kind of story will grab an audience's attention. And so your narcissist is a slanderer partly because she must be one to create a phony image. She makes herself look good mostly by making others look bad in comparison. She also slanders as a way to deal with her guilt, shame, by projecting the semblance of it off on someone else, equal a scapegoat between parentheses. Note that much of this represents guilt and shame is guilt and shame for, guess what? Slander. So it's a vicious cycle. She slanders the more to bury her shame for slandering before. Yes, that's crazy and self-destructive, but try to tell her that her magical thinking machine obstinately refuses to know that. She does have one reason for slander that makes sense though. As a slanderer, she is most vicious in slandering those she also abuses. Example, spouse, children, siblings, friends, between parentheses. Against them, she conducts a long-term smear campaign that spreads false beliefs about that person far and wide. In some instances I know of, this campaign began long before any serious abuse did. One narcissist I knew called this game block the kick between commas. That is, he slanders and calumniates those he abuses so that when they try to tell what is done to them, nobody will believe them. They will just get re-victimized and it will come out smelling like a rose. In other words, this kind of slander is calculated to discredit in advance the only people who get to see him with his mask off. Thus, just as through murder, a careful criminal leaves no witnesses between commas. True character assassination, a narcissist leaves no witnesses between commas. In advance, he assassinates their character behind their back so that they have the reputation he should have. Rumor has it that, among other things, between commas, between parentheses, his target is crazy, imagining things, and goes around telling strange lies about people, including poor him. Then when the victim tries to complain about the abuse, he or she has just walked into a booby trap. Is this the perfect crime? Or what? 6.4.1. What makes narcissists different? I think I will leave it up to you to read, because I already took enough time. But know that the chapter is not over. Page 238 and 229, 240, and then 6.4.2, those a narcissist speaks well of, which is 241, 242, 243, and 244 for the unblemished victim. No, this one is 6.4.3. So this started at the page I will put it in the video description. Thanks for listening. Women feel much less abused by being beaten than being raped. You can make sweeping statements about this because there often is a cruel psychological element in physical abuse. This is generally true of torture, and it was true of the Holocaust. The atrocious death sentences by slow torture imposed by both church and state in the past are consummate examples of physical abuse designed as vicious assaults on a person. Kathy Krajco was of the first survivors who talked about narcissistic abuse under a real name. She died unexpectedly in her home in 2008. She was 56 years old. I suspect the narc hive mind was behind her death. In her book, What Makes the Narcissists Tick, Kathy says, the way society tolerates it, You'd think mental cruelty was no big deal. It's even appearing in the media, especially in Europe, where it seems to be regarded as funny. But making light of something doesn't make it funny. It does, however, destroy your sense of humor. People blow off bullying in schools with the line that the victim is vulnerable between commas, equals to blame between parentheses, and that between commas everything gets picked on. Making light of such weighty matters is what the parents of bullies do. Mental cruelty, no big deal? Purely psychological abuse like this is usually worse than violent physical abuse. In fact, people feel less degraded by physical abuse, except insofar as there's some psychologically abusive element in it. For example, human dignity. The victims of the church especially were often dressed and or stripped naked, between parentheses, exhibited for public ridicule and contempt for hours, and then executed in ways cunningly designed to make the crowd laugh at the victim's struggles and agony. What could be more psychologically sadistic? So, when sick minds get into the act, it's hard to tell where the physical trauma ends